Right now, as we speak, the Fide Women's World Championship is going on. A match between the world champion Ju Wenjun and the challenger Tan Zhongyi. And in today's video, I would be showing you a couple of games played between them. And you know what? Just looking at these games, trust me, all of these games are just endgame masterclass. So yeah, stick around till the end. Video को like कर देना. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. So without wasting much of your time, let's get started. So while making the video right now, 5 games are already over, and पहला game जो था वो draw था, and this is the second game of the tournament where Tan Zhongyi with the white pieces, the challenger, opened with 1c4. We got a English opening, and yeah, you had this variation where Ju Wenjun played bishop c5, and there's so much tension in the center. Like we can take the knight, queen takes, then there might be some discoveries. We see d3, h6. Takes on d5, queen d5. Now you play bishop to d2, queen went back. Now you maneuver your bishop to c3, putting pressure on the pawn on e5. Queen goes to e7. Now reroute your knight to d2, knight d5. You play e3 and knight to b4. Now you have two options. Either you can go something like knight c4, put pressure like this, or you play pawn to a4 and अपना डार्क्स का बिशप को तुम कैप्चर करवा देते हो. Now after b into c3, you see there is in this pawn structure d4 is a move which you are going to see in the future, and that is pleasant for white. First she plays a5, bishop के लिए escape route को block कर दिया. Now bishop d7, queen to b3, putting pressure on the b7 pawn, rook to b8, knight to e4, attacking the bishop, and she captures the dark square bishop as well. Now d4, b6 आता है, you capture back. Now rook to a7. Now there are threats like bishop e6 इसलिए खेला because you can play takes on e5, deflect the queen and get the bishop. So bishop e6 attacking the queen. You play queen a4, rook to c8, rook b1, and after so many exchanges we land into a position where it's just a dead draw. But you know what? This is where the fun begins. You have two rooks on the board. There are two pawns, eyeing, looking each other. You have 3 on 3. How in the world you would win this position? First, identify your strength. There is a rook on a7. The rook जब 7th heaven पे होता है, you want to put another rook on the 7th rank so that you can create chaos on this rank. So rook e1, rook to e7. You are playing very actively with your rooks. Takes. Now c5. You bring your king to the center. The only difference, I would say, even if the position is completely equal, both the kings, the difference is white का king जो है वो थोड़ा ज़्यादा active है. So white is slightly better. Takes. King आता है f8 पे. You play rook to b7, putting active pressure. So एक और चीज़ मैं तुम्हें बताना चाहूँगा. When the rooks are behind the pawn, that is the best possible scenario you can look for. Like the difference is if you give a check, I go up, you threaten rook c2, threatening the pawn on f2, you go back, another check, now you play king to d2, now you can't play rook c2. अब rook f3 खेलना पड़ेगा. Now I go king to e2, attacking the rook. Where do you go? Rook f5. Apparently, rook to b3 was the best move, guarding your pawn. But the moment you play rook f5, the rook is kinda misplaced, and that is something you would see in the future. King e3, h5, f4, king e8, the first blunder of the tournament. You play king e4, attacking the rook. Where does the rook go? Rook jaga f6 pe. Now you capture back, and you are just a pawn up. Now, the idea is to give some checks, maybe try to promote the pawn. G6 khela, we push the pawn. Now, just bring your king. Now, tell me the difference. How active this king is. You give a check, I go back, rook a2, putting pressure on the h2 pawn. We don't really care. We just push our king, march up on the board, give some checks, and get this pawn instead. Pawn push kya. You see, even if you play something like take on g6, it is fairly easier draw. So pawn push karna is the best move. Now you play captures here, putting pressure on this pawn. King up, up, push your pawn. अब यहाँ पे देखो, like this strategy, you push your king. Now you play rook in pawn push, rook a3, rook h3. Now your idea is to cut this king and make a distance. ये जो pawn है ना, इसके बीच के अंदर distance create करना, simultaneously keeping an eye on this pawn, and so that you can bridge your king out and make a queen. How do you do that? First, you give a check. You drop back your rook. Now this is under, a little bit pressure. King a6. You play rook to e2. Bridge किया अपने pawn को. Now you drop your king back. And the next move, you are threatening a queen. So at king idhar aata, you make a queen. If the rook goes here, you can obviously capture back. And you're still threatening a promotion. King here. You just throw in a check. Go here and make a queen. And that's a win from Tan Zhongyi. So with this, after round number 2, the scores were 1.5 to 0.5, and now the next game, Ju Wenjun with the white pieces opened with 1 e4, c5, the Sicilian defense, knight f3, e6, like the Taimanov Sicilian type, French Sicilian mixed combination. We see c4. I mean, I don't play e4 at all, but even if I do, I never play c4. Like, how would you play c4? I mean, it is obviously a good opening, no doubt, but yeah, knight c6, d4, takes, bishop to b4 check, knight c3, and these are just fairly, theories. You take back, now you take on c6, and you castle. If you take on c4, obviously, you just तुम castle वगैरह नहीं कर पाओगे गेम में. So castles, c takes d5, pawn takes, and bishop f3, pinning the pawn to the rook. Bishop e6 पे आता है, bishop g5. Now you see how actively she is playing, the world champion. Pinning the knight, pinning the pawn, everything looks great. Bishop c3. Now, the tension is kind of relieved on c3. Rook to c8, and the position is fairly equal. You play queen f4. With the idea of if you take on c3, I take back on a7. h6 aata hai, you drop your bishop back, defending the pawn, a5, and rook to e1. Rook c4 attacking the queen. Queen drops back to a3. And, right around here, she played queen d6, exchanging, offering an exchange, and that allowed the capture of this pawn. And rook to a8 khela. Actively playing, even if you're pawn down, but you have a lot of activity. You're attacking the queen has to go to b4, offering an exchange. Yahan pe she didn't really took the queen. She first took the pawn on a2, and in this position, Ju Wenjun played bishop to f4. The reason of bishop f4, this is such a lovely positional move. Obviously, agar tum kuch nahi karoge, I will just take back the queen, and if you take my queen, I took back with the pawn, improving my pawn and creating a passer. So that's why she didn't really take the queen. She played queen c6, bishop to b5, attacking the queen, and again rook e2. Now ab exchange karo, and I am improving my position. Rook a8, bishop d3, still with the same idea of exchanging the queen. She played rook a1, rook e1, takes, and queen to d8 back. Now, h3 khela, back rank problem fixed. How do you win this position? It seems fairly equal. Like, there is a pawn on c3, but there is also a pawn on d5. I mean, everything is equal. Okay, queen f6 aata hai. You play rook e1 with the idea of playing bishop to e5 in the future. Rook c8, bishop e5, attacking the queen, queen g5, and bishop a6. Ab ye dekho, the rook on c8 is threatening, putting pressure on the c3 pawn. So how do you harass the rook? First you play, bishop f4, attack the queen, bishop b7, bishop c7, rook f8. Ab tumhara jo rook hai na, wo ho chuka pura passive. Rook d1 aayega, queen g5, you take the free pawn, and now in this position, my friend, Tan Zhongyi played knight to e3. That's a lovely, brilliant move. First of all, you are threatening some sort of checkmate. So let's say if you take, in the game she played h4, which is like, fairly a good move. But agar tum yahan pe, let's say, marte ho. So I think there is bishop d5, threatening a checkmate. Pawn push karke tumhe rukna padega. Now you give a check and just collect back, and this is just, it is what it is. Right. So, give me a second. H4 aata hai. Queen G4 takes. And this is the position we need to work with. Obviously, pawn se nahi mara because the rook was hanging. Rook to D3. And you take back. And you are just a pawn up. जो चीज लास्ट गेम में तान जोंगी ने की थी अगेंस्ट जू वेंजुन, नाउ जू वेंजुन इज गोइंग टू डू द सेम थिंग, back. She is a pawn up. Now you will see an amazing masterclass of endgame. First, bishop b6, attacking the rook. Bishop e6, you drop rook to d6. अब centralize किया अपने bishop को. You push your king, and तुम्हारा king center में अभी ज़्यादा better है. Now you play g3, थोड़ी बहुत checks. And the question is, how would you push this pawn? We would see that. c4, c5, and king to f4. Now, this is defended. You might have these kind of plans. You are also going here. So bishop agar c8 पे जाएगा, तो you can play rook e4. And you are slightly better. Okay, now give a check. You're not exchanging. By the way, ऐसे position में a pro tip. Opposite color bishop endgames, even with the pawn up, are mostly draw. So if you exchange the rooks and we have the same position, it's a draw. So that's why she played a check first. Agar rook ko bachate to bishop mar jata. So first a check, then drop your rook back. That's the plan. Bishop f4. This pawn is hanging. You play bishop e3. It's protected. अब लेके जाओ अपने रुक को actively, creating threats. Slightly, धीरे धीरे position crumble अपने आप करना start करेगा. Pawn is under attack. Just push your pawn to f3, creating some mating threats with g4 ideas in the future. Rook c4, you push your pawn. Improve, takes. अब इस position में she played bishop to b6 with ideas of c7 and c8 plans. c7 खेला, attack the rook, and this is, it's very, very tough. Even if you see like the bars and stuff and white is better, but how are you exactly winning? You can't really find the best move. Rook c4 aata hai. And again, you see the bar is dropping, but the move h4 is not really the best move. And apparently, ye h4 move hi tha, which resulted in, immediate failure. And the reason is, you give a check, you take back on h4. Now, you just push your pawn. Rook c5. Guess what? In this position, you play h6, which is a brilliant move. You basically sacrifice your pawn, and yeah. And you basically sacrifice your bishop, and you make a queen. So bishop c8, you make h7, and there is no other move. And yeah, Tan Zhongyi resigned, and Ju Wenjun equalized the score with 1.5 to 1.5. Now, game number 4, I think, that is something we need to look at. Yeah, game number 5 was a draw. So, Ju Wenjun, right now, with the white pieces, opened with e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, takes, bishop d3, bishop c5, and now this is the Sicilian Khan variation. अब ये थियरीज वगैरह पे ध्यान देने की जरूरत नहीं है. वी जस्ट वांट टू सी हाउ थिंग्स हैपन. नाउ मूव लाइक b5, दिस इज समथिंग आई कांट रियली एक्सप्लेन व्हाई शी वांटेड टू टेक. आई मीन b5, okay, en passant, maybe she wants some sort of f2 पे pressure in the future with like h5, knight g4, these kind of moves maybe. Okay, so b5, f4 आता है पहले, kicking the knight out, knight goes c4, a4. Okay, ये मैं कुछ analyze कर रहा था, कुछ ज़्यादा arrows है. Let me try to explain. The idea of a4 is, obviously, you can, after takes, bishop c4 plans is there. If you take back on here, queen b3, and there are some pressure like this. And also, a4 के बाद you can take on a4, and the knight is also hanging. So, she played b4, took back the knight, and b into c3, takes. And apparently, b into c3 की जगह पे अगर queen d4 खेलते was better, keeping an eye on the g7 pawn, and also c3 का pawn भी मर रहा होता. So yeah, took back on c3, bishop b7, putting pressure on the e4 pawn, queen e2, castles, bishop d3, f5, takes, bishop e3. अब ये जो है अपना जो pawn है ना, like वो भी protected हो चुका है. Now queen c7, that drops a pawn on a6. Right around here, everything seems very solid. h3, no back rank problems. Rook to f2, pura second rank control ho gaya. And now just look at this. Everything is exchange. The position seems fairly alright. King h2, rook e1. थोड़े बहुत threats है, but that doesn't really matter. If rook h1 plans, king here, queen check, there is bishop f2 always. So yeah, we saw something like that. Bishop f2, queen e2, and it's a matter of technique now. You see, rook idhar aata hai, the knight is under attack, you play here. Bishop e3, pawn push. Now always you have this passer and you are creating threats on the a5. Rook idhar aata, attacking the bishop, you drop back your bishop. She shuffled and now played knight to c4, defending the bishop like this. Rook idhar aata hai. Now you gallop your knight to d6, and after a couple of moves we see, I'll show you amazing trick she played. Obviously, first of all, lovely move, a6, you sacrifice your pawn on a6 and you get back the pawn on f4. Mate threaten kiya g2 pe, you drop your queen back to f3. Now, you see, she is not trying to, hurry and exchange into endgame, which is fairly holdable for black. She played knight f5, g5, and knight to e3. अब ये जो है threat, ये eliminate हो गया, and also that is defending the pawn as well. Pawn push, knight d5, and in this position, she played knight to e7, which is a brilliant move. And yeah, Tan Zhongyi just resigned, and guess what? अगर तुम यहाँ पे इसको मारते हो, do you know what happens? There is queen g6, queen g7. Obviously, there is just captures on g7, and that's a checkmate. But अगर तुम king f8 खेलते हो, there is queen f5. You lose your rook. Check, check, check. Pawn push. Make a queen. Give a check, and just checkmate on f3. That's like mate in 14 or 15, something like that. I didn't even count really. So yeah, with this, the scores are currently, I think, 2-3. Wait, let me check. Yeah, Ju Wenjun 3 points and Tan Zhongyi 2 points. So yeah, that's though, these are the games for you guys. I hope तुम लोग को recap अच्छा लगा. Let me know in the comments कि if you want me to make more videos on the upcoming games. If yes, comment कर देना. And yeah, that's it for today. Subscribe to the channel and smash that like button अगर तुम्हें वीडियो पसंद आई होगी. And yeah, I would see you guys in the next one. Kate Gaming signing off. Goodbye and peace.